Hello book lovers, and welcome back or welcome to Natcat's Bookish Cafe. Today we will be going through my stats for 2024 as well as seeing if I accomplished the goals I had set for myself. Alright guys, if you are a stats person, then I am sure that you look forward to these videos all year long. I myself have a hate-love relationship with them because I am not a stats girly, I am not a spreadsheet girly, so it is always a bit of a struggle for me to be putting all of this stuff together. But I do it because I find it interesting and I want to just make sure that I am accomplishing the goals that I want to accomplish. So throughout this video, we're gonna go just through any of the random stats that I happen to have here. I should have little pie graphs for you to take a look at, and then once we go through all those, we will go over to my 2024 bingo board where I put all of my goals, and we will see which ones of those I accomplished and if I got any bingos. So without further ado, let's go ahead and go into the stats. I'm going to be looking down at my computer here, but I will most likely be a little bubble in the corner or something based off of my current plans for how I want to set this up. Starting with some of the basic statistics that I often go through on a month-to-month basis when I am doing my monthly reading wrap-ups. We are going to go ahead and start with how many books I read in the year 2024, and that number ended up being 124, which I think is a great number. For most of these stats, I am not going to have the difference, but for these basic stats, I did take a look at my 2023 numbers, and I had read 158 books in 2023. So I'm actually happy with the fact that this number is lower because that is kind of my goal, to read less. To go ahead and try those longer, more intimidating books, even though it means that I will read less in a month, you know, not to put too much stress on myself, to be continuously reading more and more every year, just spending more time with my books, or even if I'm not in the mood for reading, not pushing myself to do so when I don't want to. So the fact that this number is about 34 lower, I am actually pretty happy with that. I always set my number at 100, and I really don't want to be going too far over that. On the other hand, we have our page count number, which comes to 26,483 with page numbers. I don't count the pages for audiobooks. I know some people do. For me, I only count audiobook hours, and then when it comes to pages, these are the number of physical pages that I read. This is once again lower than 2023, but I figure since we read 34 books less, that reading 4,000 pages less isn't actually that big of a deal. I don't know, it doesn't seem like too many for me, and I'm not too upset about that. Audiobook hours, it was once again lower. Did the fact that I went into an audiobook slump at the end of the year contribute? Possibly. I mean, I'm looking at my stats here. In October, I listened to 3 hours of audiobooks. In November, it was 0. So the total was 344.46 hours. One thing I will say with audiobooks, I take into account how long the audiobook is, not how long I listen. I listen to my audiobooks on 2 times speed all the time. So if you want to divide that number by half, you definitely can. This is the way I do it because it's just easier for me. It is definitely less, almost by 200 minutes than the year before. So we were just not super in the audiobook mood this year. That's fine. Then on the bright side, my average rating for the year was a 4.10. I always aim to have an average rating over 4 stars because I want to make sure that, you know, the majority of the books I'm reading are 4.5, 5-star reads. I don't want to have a lot of 3 stars, 2 stars, or anything along those lines. The year before, we almost made it. I remember how frustrated I was that my average rating was a 3.99. So we were a little bit higher this year. Just to break it down a little bit, I'm hoping that I kept up on this. Sometimes not 100%, and I'm assuming some of these numbers might be a little bit off when it comes to my star ratings, because usually once I finish a book, I will update this number. The fact that I include DNFs or books that I didn't rate, oftentimes like nonfiction books, may skew the number. I mean, here it says a total of 123. So there's clearly some books that are missing, but that doesn't impact this 4.10 rating because that is based off of my star ratings in the main spreadsheets. So like I said, this might be off by a few, but essentially we had 23 5-star reads. Would like that to be higher. We had 22 4.5-star reads. We had 41 4-star reads. I have always been someone who rates the majority of my books 4 stars, so I'm not surprised that this number is more than double what I was giving any of the other ratings. Then 3.5, we gave 20. We only had 10 3 stars, and then we only had 1 2.5 and 1 2-star. So I don't rate books very low very often, especially since I am someone who DNFs. So I do have here 2 DNFs that I did not rate. That is not accurate. I had more than 2 DNFs that I did not rate. If you watch my video where I talk about my DNFs, disappointments, and surprises, you will see that. So that was just clearly not updated. 3 that I did not rate, that might be accurate because I do think I had a couple of nonfictions that I read this year that I love so much that I ended up giving them 5 stars. And usually when it comes to nonfictions, if I feel that they are 5-star read, I will give them 5 stars. If they're anything other than a 5-star, I probably just don't rate them. So that is my star breakdown. And then let's go ahead and jump into the actual statistics, what we're all here for. Well, that was stats as well, but you know, now we want to get into the graphs. All right, I'm gonna go in the order of which they are listed here for me, so they might be a little all over the place. So we're gonna start with character sexuality. One thing I want to preface when it comes to any sort of representation is that the main character has to embody this essentially. So if there is like a side character that is POC, disabled, queer, unless they are like a really big part of the story, I won't count it. So there are certain times where I may put in a book like there are no POC characters, there are no disabled characters, there are no queer characters. And there might be, but they are not a big enough part of the story. The way I usually decide if I will put it as fulfilling one of those stats is if someone were to look at me and be like, I'm looking for a book with queer representation, I would recommend this book. There are certain books where you would not recommend it for queer representation, even though it may have like a queer side character in it. So just prefacing that for any of the stats going in here, keep that in mind. Just because it says 0 or none doesn't 100% mean like nothing at all. All right, so starting off, number of books that had any sort of LGBTQ plus representation in that, we had 75 out of our 124 books, so that was sitting at about 60%. We love to see it because I do prefer that 50 or more percent of the books that I'm reading have some sort of queer representation in them. That being said, breaking it down a little bit, looking at this is the percent of queer books that I read that had these specific types of representation. So it's not that 38% of all the books I read had bisexual, or this also includes pansexual representation in it. It's 38% of the queer books that I read had this type of representation. Something to keep in mind when looking at our fun little pie charts here is the numbers in the pie chart are going to be a little different than what you see here in the columns. I would say that the ones in the column are a better representation, essentially because there are books that have multiple forms of queer representation in them. The total number equals more than 100, and so the chart kind of tries to make it fit. And so that's why the numbers are a little bit different. So that's just something to keep in mind, that I would go ahead and look at these column numbers rather than the chart. But as you can see, I read primarily books with gay or Achillean is also what it's known as, representation. It's always been that way. I enjoy me a nice Achillean or male romance. I'm a simple girl. Second highest would be bisexual. Like I said, that also includes like pansexual. As with a lot of my categories, these are slightly oversimplified, but you know, I don't want to overcomplicate my stats because it is hard enough to update this stats list and hunt down some of this information. I don't need to make it harder for myself. Then we go into lesbian representation. Next highest is going to be non-binary and trans representation. I'm pretty happy with how high that is at almost 15%. I have pretty good luck with trans and non-binary rep. There's something about those books where they're usually hits. I don't have too many misses with them. And then the lowest from what I am tracking is anyone on the ace spectrum. Would I like this to be higher as someone who identifies as ace herself? Of course, but I know that it's definitely not as common as like some of the other sexualities that are represented here. So not too much to say on this, nothing really unexpected there. Let's go ahead and jump into the races of the characters or ethnicities. Once again, here you really get to see how oversimplified it is, especially when you look at like Asian. The Asian continent is freaking huge, and like East Asian and West Asian are completely different. I did for a while try to separate them, but it just got a little convoluted, and so I decided to oversimplify it. I apologize if you have an issue with that. I'm just trying to have some basic stats for me to reference when I can see where I am lacking in my reading. All right, so the biggest category here is white. Now, once again, like with the sexuality, there are multiple characters in books, and so this just means that 55.65% of the books that I read had a prominent white character. This does not mean that over 50% of the books had only white characters. Would I want this number to be a little bit lower? Yeah, I would not mind that. The next highest is Asian. Again, Asia is a huge continent, so hitting one of those countries is not exactly hard. I will say that I am someone who probably reads East Asian a lot more than like West Asian. Just something to point out. That's something I know just off the top of my head, even without doing the stat for it. Up next, we have Black characters. This is sitting at a little over 20%, so that's not too terrible. The two categories I struggle with the most, Hispanic and Indigenous characters. This is something I set specific goals for myself, and I didn't hit either of them this year. So these are pretty disappointing numbers. Now, I will say I'm saying that when I'm looking at characters, I was specifically looking at authors. So we'll look at that in just a second. So character-wise, the numbers are a little bit higher because sometimes there are Hispanic or Native characters in books written by authors that are not Hispanic, Latinx, or Indigenous. But those numbers are definitely the lowest, and I would not mind them going up. All right, looking at some of the data for our authors, we will go ahead and start with their race. Over 50% were white. Now, it is not over 50% by a lot, but while I've never really set a goal for this, I feel like it would be nice if 50% or less of the authors that I was reading was white. So I would like to decrease that a little bit. I'm hoping that as I get better by reading more Hispanic and Indigenous authors, that will kind of naturally occur. As you can see, I read 7 books by Hispanic authors. Is that correct? Because I thought it was only 5. I might have to look into that. So because I set a goal to read 10 books by Hispanic authors, I did not achieve that, even if I did read 7 instead of 5. And then on the other hand, I set a goal to read 5 books by an Indigenous author, and I only read 4, which is what I did last year as well, which is really frustrating that I keep only reading 4 books when I set the goal at 5. Like, just read one more damn book. Once again, the second highest is Asian authors, not surprising, since when we were looking at our characters, chances are Asian authors are writing Asian characters, so these are probably kind of gonna correspond with each other. Looking at Black authors, I wanted to read 20 books by Black authors, and I achieved that. Just barely. Just barely. So we could probably do a little bit better on that as well. So yes, this is somewhere I definitely need to make some more progress, but we have goals in place, and if we actually achieve those goals, that would be helpful. Looking at the gender of our authors, we have male, female, non-binary. Not surprisingly, reading mostly female. Been that way since the beginning of time probably, and will probably continue on that way till the day I die, because I am a woman. And so I read primarily female authors. Non-binary includes just those who use they, them pronouns. I will say, I'm trying to think, there are certain authors that use like she, they, or he, they. I believe in that case, I usually put them as non-binary just because they do make use of the they, them pronouns. And if an author is trans, I put them as the gender that they identify as. So if it's a trans woman, I put them under female because that is what they are. So then I'm kind of surprised by how many books I read by men, but then at the same time, as someone who enjoys male romances, I have read a few own voices male romances, which is good. So that's probably why that number is a little bit higher. Then if we look at our stats of which authors are queer, when it comes to this, I do not become Sherlock Holmes to try to figure out the sexuality of the authors, okay? Unless they have it like in their little biography. Sometimes I might look on their Instagram to see if there's anything that I can suss out. If I cannot find it, then I am going to assume that they are straight. I'm never going to assume that someone is queer. Maybe they don't want to come out as queer. Maybe they aren't queer, you know, just because they're writing queer characters doesn't mean that they are. So I am assuming most likely that this number is higher, but this is like queer authors that are out and openly queer. Would I like this number to be higher? Yeah, I would. But like I said, it is not a author's job to put their sexuality in their biography. They don't have to share that with us. And so the statistic is always probably like never going to be accurate, but that's fine. 31% is decent. But like I said, I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit higher because it also means that I'm reading more own voices, because 60% of my books were queer and only 30% of them were written by queer authors. And so that means like almost half of the books that I am reading but that are queer may not be own voices. So that is definitely something we can improve on a little bit. Now taking a look at our comparison of fiction and nonfiction. non-surprisingly, I am reading primarily fiction. I have to admit, I am getting more and more attracted to the idea of reading more nonfiction. I have started following a couple people that read primarily nonfiction, and they have definitely enticed me to pick up more, and I've definitely added more to my TBR. But I know that for the most part, I am a fiction girly. I think that just our current political climate and the fact that there are so many uneducated people here in America who are just allowing themselves to be like misled has definitely had me kind of stick in my heels and be like, hell no, I'm not going to become ignorant. I'm not going to be one of these idiots. I am going to make sure that I am continuing to educate myself. And so that is kind of where my drive to read more nonfiction is coming from, not just so that I can educate myself, but so that I have the resources to educate other people as well who may be falling for those fake facts and fear mongering and everything that is going on in our country right now. So my desire to read nonfiction definitely is very deeply steeped in my unhappiness for our current political climate. But this last year, I only read 5 nonfiction. I always set a goal for 6, and I like never accomplish it. This year in 2025, though, I am going to accomplish it. I just know it. I can feel it in my bones. We are going to read at least 6, if not more, nonfiction, because I am on the nonfiction hype train right now. All right, so then we have a couple forms of representation: mental health representation and disability representation. Essentially, with mental health, I consider it anything anxiety, depression, extreme grief, and a lot of my books have that in them. We do like a stressed out, sad character, especially since I read so many queer books. A lot of queer characters are going through the ringer and facing mental health issues. So 59 of my books had that representation, almost 50%. So that is pretty good. We like to see that representation. Then we have disability representation. Disability representation could include anything like autism, ADHD, they're blind, deaf, any sort of physical disabilities, amputee, MS, anything along those lines. This number is definitely a lot lower. I believe I set a goal for reading, was it 20 books with disability representation? I think it was. So we did achieve that goal this year. So I know that disability representation is a little harder to come across than mental health, so not surprised that number is lower. I don't think this is a terrible amount, so I'm not super unhappy with it, but if it was higher, I would not be upset. I mean, I think like 25%, just like a couple percentage points higher, might be nice, might be something good to aim for. All right, so we are now moving into the genres, the interesting portion. So these are all my genres that I have listed out here. And I read primarily romance. Now I will say with genres, like some other things, I will click multiple. I won't put like the primary genre. So if we are dealing with like a historical horror, I will mark it as both historical and horror thriller mystery. So just keep that in mind, that there is one book who could have like up to 3 different genres marked. That being said, the majority of the books that I read had some sort of romance in them. And as you can see, I also kind of put or broke down my romance categories for historical, fantasy, contemporary, sci-fi, dystopian, and paranormal. The most common one was contemporary, which I was kind of surprised by because I feel like all year I have been hating on contemporary romance, but I was apparently still primarily reading that out of anything else. Not too much fantasy romance, to be honest. It is a lot lower than contemporary romance. Then we have some historical romance. which I enjoy from time to time. And then the lowest at exactly the same, because I read 8 of each, we have sci-fi, dystopian, and paranormal for the romance section of this. So I'm wondering if we'll see a reduction in the contemporary romance just because I was not really enjoying it this last year, but I'm not sure. I think I primarily struggled with what I call heterosexual contemporary romance, so I'm sure that a lot of these contemporaries are also just queer. Going back to the general genres, like I said, romance was the highest. Then the next highest was contemporary, which isn't surprising considering most of the contemporary romances I would have marked as contemporary as well. Then we had a pretty good percentage of horror, thriller, mystery. I feel like I was getting a lot more into that genre this year, so we'll see if that goes ahead and continues, because I've definitely added a lot more to my TBR because I've just been growing very fond of that. Up next we have a fantasy. I always say that I am a pretty heavy fantasy reader, but looking at these stats, I didn't read too many. I mean 30 fantasy books. That's a good amount, but out of 124, not even a quarter of the books were fantasy. So can I call myself like a primary fantasy reader? No, I cannot. Then we had some sci-fi. I feel like I'm trying to think, if it was closer to the beginning of the year, was kind of like, I'm gonna be a sci-fi girly. And then that started to kind of fade away throughout the year. I really want to get into sci-fi, but there's something about it where it's just like hard for me to do. Like, it doesn't happen very often. I'm intrigued by sci-fi, especially like a sci-fi horror thriller situation, but then I just don't pick them up a lot. Up next, let's see, we had quite a few paranormal. That might be because I was doing horror, thriller, mystery, and obviously ghosts kind of go with that. And then we are looking at historical fiction, which I don't read a ton of unless it's romance. Historical fiction is not my favorite. I will say that I enjoy like a historical mystery from time to time more than I enjoy like a contemporary mystery. So that might be what some of these books here are, if not romance. And then we have, no surprise, literary fiction is pretty low. I don't read a lot of lit fic. Not really my jam. And then classics, 2 classics this year. Not surprising, because I'm not a big classics girly. I did list my graphic novels here, even though I didn't put them in this chart because it's not a genre, but I did read 11 graphic novels / manga this year, which is less than I thought I would, because if you watch my video where I talk about my series, which may or may not already be out. If it's not out, then obviously you haven't seen it, but I did mention that I thought I would read the entire Tokyo Ghoul series this year, and I read 3 of them. So that did not happen, but that is my genres. Looking at the age groups for readers, essentially most of these books are for adults. Not surprising, I myself am an adult, so I read mostly adult books. I have 3 under new adult. I'm not sure if I'm going to get rid of that. I feel like they kind of try to put new adult out there, but it didn't 100% stick because I don't hear about it too often. So this year I kind of tracked it, but you know, what's adult, what's new adult, what's YA, I don't know. Then we have about a little under 19% were YA books. I still enjoy YA books from every now and then, especially if they're queer, especially if they're horror. Those are some things that I enjoy in YA books. And then we had 4 middle grade. I don't read a lot of middle grade, but we got a couple in there. So yeah, primarily adult, no surprises there. Now looking at if they were a series, a standalone, a companion novel. Essentially a series means that you have to read each book and you should read them in order if you want to know what's going on. Standalone obviously doesn't have anything else going on, and a companion novel is oftentimes, you know, those romance series which each one follows a different character, and you could technically pick them up in whatever order you wanted. I usually prefer to read them in order just because you see stuff from the other characters or it makes references to previous books. But I was kind of surprised by the fact that I only read 19 companion books. I thought I would have read more because I have quite a few romance series going on, but I also didn't read books from those series. Just because they're currently going on in my life doesn't mean I'm actually picking them up. So I was reading primarily books in a series, which I think is good because it means that I am continuing the series that I am currently working on. It is unfortunately also meaning that I'm starting new series, which can definitely get me into a little bit of trouble. And then we have 48 standalones. I feel like I don't read standalones too often, but I mean, it looks like actually a pretty decent amount of them are standalones, so that is not too shabby. All right, so this is where I got books from. Did I get them from my personal TBR? Did I get them off KU? Did I get them from the library? Did I get them through Libby? This year I went ahead and separated Libby and the library. I think in previous years I had them together, but I kind of wanted to see which percentage of books I was getting physically from the library, either like an actual physical book or a ebook. I don't think I got any ebooks through the library this last year, but that would also count towards the stat. And I was surprised by how big the Libby portion is, just based off of how few audiobooks I was listening to towards the end of the year. But clearly before that slump, I was chugging along with audiobooks and read 36 audiobooks. Most of the books that I was reading was coming from my own TBR, which we like to see because we want to go ahead and be making progress in that. So almost 50%, which I think I would like it at about 50%, that about 50% of the books I'm reading are my own books. And then 14 books, a little over 11% was KU. I would say I don't get KU every month. I usually get it in specific months, and then when I get it, I only get it for 1 month, and I intentionally read at least 3 to 4 books for me to feel like it's worth the money that I spend on it. And I would say I get KU about 2 to 3 times a year, so that makes sense. That number is always going to be a little bit lower because it's not a source that I have access to every month because I have to pay for it. But the library, I will say this year, I set a goal to read 24 books by or from the library. So I do need to read a little bit more from the library than I did this last year, but I think 20 isn't too shabby of a number. And I have a feeling that unless I kick this slump like next month when it comes to audiobooks, that this Libby number is going to be a little bit lower in 2025, but we'll see. Who knows what happens? All right, so we're getting into the final graph, and then we have just a couple extra stats that I don't have a graph for. We're looking at publisher. Is it traditional? Is it indie or self-published? I always struggled between the difference between like an indie and a self-pub. So I kind of smushed those together so I don't have to like search and figure it out. I will also say there's totally a chance that I put a book as traditional and it's indie published, because again, I don't even know who the publishers of my book are. That's not something that I look into. I was looking into it a little bit when St. Martin, was it St. Martin Press? I don't even remember who it was anymore, was in trouble. But for the most part, I literally have no idea who publishing companies are. It's just not something that I'm overly interested in. I will say that there are some people who say like there are certain publishing companies where they have more success with their books. So it might be interesting to keep an eye on. So you could be like, oh, like a lot of people say they really like Tor or Orbit, that they really like their fantasies and sci-fi. So they, you know, keep an eye out on their releases specifically. But for me, I don't often look at new releases until other people start talking about them. That's too much work for me. So I I don't really keep an eye on what publishing companies are doing, except for the fact that I am at the same time kind of keeping an eye on what they're doing because they have their problems and I'm aware of those. I'm watching enough to know that you guys are doing stuff wrong. But yes, I wouldn't mind if I read more indie self-published books. That's for sure. So I wouldn't mind if that number increases. But we got our little Pooh Bear graph here with his red t-shirt and his big round belly. And we are definitely reading mostly what I'm assuming is traditional books. So then before we get into the goals, a couple extra random facts. Translated books. Only about 10.48% of the books that I read were translated. I believe I set a goal to read 25 translated books. That was because I thought that I would read the whole entire Tokyo Ghoul series, which would have added what, like 14 books to this. That didn't happen. I also kind of thought that I would pick up another Don Me series like these, which are translated from Mandarin. That also did not happen. So while my best book of the year was a translated book, I did not read a lot of translated books, and so that is something we need to work on. Rereads, I reread 7 books this year. My goal was to reread 6, so I did accomplish that. A little over 5% of the books I read are rereads. I'm not a huge rereader, to be honest, so this number being low is not surprising to me. And then looking at new authors, so I read 57 books by new authors this year, which is quite nice. I believe I did want to read 40% repeat authors because I want to make sure that I am continuing series and that I'm also picking up books by authors that I have enjoyed in the past. So I did accomplish that because 55% of the books that I read were repeat authors, but I'm also glad that I am checking out new authors and potentially adding them to my list of authors I would like to check out again. All right, so those are all the stats. Let's take a look at my goal sheet here. So as you can see, I kind of have it where you can see the blank copy so you can actually see the words, and then you can also see the one with my little accomplishment hearts on it. I did not get any bingos. Yeah, I accomplished about 60% of my goals and it did not lead to a bingo, so that's a bummer. So just to go through them really quickly, the first goal is to finish 10 series. I did accomplish that. If I haven't put out my series thing yet, I believe I read 12 series this year. Second goal, read 100 books. We know we accomplished that. Then one of the goals was to read a specific book, which is Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Faraday Abeki Umedi. I did read that. On the other hand, I did not read A Deadly Education by Naomi Nitve. I did not read 6 nonfiction books. I only read 5. I did not take part in 4 rounds of Is Bailey Reading's book club. Book clubs are not my strong suit. I did start a book club this year with a couple women that are in my area. So it's an in-person book club that's going to be happening every other month. So I am hopefully going to be taking part in that book club. This is not a goal I will be repeating. Obviously, if her book club chooses a book that I'm interested in, I will see about taking part in that. A goal I did accomplish is, hold up, I listed them all out here. So let's see, disability, representation. Yeah, I have them all listed out here, so I know for a fact that I have 30 because I went ahead and tracked them. So I did accomplish that. For some reason, my stat sheet is missing one book. I might need to hunt it down and see which one it is, but we did accomplish that. 6 rereads. We did accomplish that. Hooray. Most Ardently by Gabe Kolnova. I did read that, as well as Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I did read 20 books by Black authors, and I did spend under $1,000 on books. I didn't really talk about my book spending or how many books I read this year. I just realized, let me see. If I go to my page of purchases, that's 2022. Oh, it looks like I read quite a few of the books that damn, I read a lot. Or I bought a lot of books this year. $750.62 is how much I spent on books. Of my money, I did buy things with gift cards. I was gifted books and I put those as zeros. So I probably got more than $1,000 worth of books, but I personally only spent $750.62 on books. And I don't know how many I bought, but I'm not gonna count that because it's too many. So sorry guys, just know that I didn't spend over $1,000. I did not read 25 translated books. We just went over that. I did go to 3 silent book clubs. I actually believe I've gone to more than that. I did read 3 books from my These Books Will Self-Destruct list. I did not read 10 books off of my Kindle. I believe I only read 5, so did not accomplish that. I did not read all 10 of my intimidating books. Those were the books that I had in my little challenge cup that I was pulling from February to November. I'm trying to remember if it was 1 or 2 of those books that I did not. I think it was 2. I think it was Babel and The City of Brass. Yeah, so I think there was the last 2 that I pulled. I just did not get around to, so did not accomplish that. 10 books by Hispanic authors. That was the one where I wasn't sure if I've read 7 or if I read 5. I do know, I'll have to check my stats because there was an author that I read who claimed to be Hispanic, and then it later came out that they were not Hispanic, and so I took them off of my Hispanic books read list, but it is possible they may still be marked in my spreadsheet, so I will need to go ahead and double check on that because they are not Hispanic, they're liars. So I read somewhere between 5 and 7 books by Hispanic authors, but not 10. I did not have one set of live sprints per quarter. I think I did live sprints once last year. I am just not a live sprint girly. I don't attend live sprints very often. I don't do live sprints like ever. It's just not something that I'm doing a lot or feel the need to do a lot, so I did not make that a goal again. Does that mean I will never do live sprints again in the history of my channel? No, I may do them, but it's just not something that I'm often feeling the urge to do. So 40% repeat authors, we did go ahead and accomplish that. I did read The Invocations by Crystal Sutherland, did not like it, so that was a bummer. I did read Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi, that one I did enjoy. I did not read 5 books by Indigenous authors. As we saw, I only read 4. And I did reach 600 YouTube followers. I believe I am at a little over 800 right now. I've once again kind of become stagnant with my follower count. I never know how this works. It seems like every once in a while your number just like jumps and then you just stay at the same number for like months. I'm just chilling, guys. I'm glad you're here. You know, I didn't put another goal revolving around follower count because it's like not super important to me. If you want to be here, I want you to be here and I'm happy you're here. But this is not a career for me, so like channel growth is not at the forefront of my mind or anything. I'm just here to have fun. And then the last goal that I accomplished was 50% queer books, which we did do. So yeah, if only I read 6 nonfiction, or if I had done Bailey's book club. But the 6 nonfiction I was only 1 away from, and I only took part in 1 round of Bailey's book club. I technically took part in 2 because I was a co-host for one of them, but I didn't count that one. So I was nowhere near accomplishing that goal. But the nonfiction one, I was only 1 away from it, and then I could have had a bingo. But alas, no bingo. If you want to see what my goals are for 2025, I did once again do a bingo board and I have a video for that, so I'll link that up above. You know, fingers crossed we actually accomplish a bingo, if not a blackout, for our goals here in 2025. All right, guys, so those were all of my statistics, as well as taking a look at if I accomplished my goals for the year or not. I would love to know how you guys did with your reading this year. Anything you want to share about it, any goals that you're proud of achieving, any goals that you didn't achieve but are hoping to focus on in 2025. Let me know what's going on with your reading and reading goals. As always, guys, thank you so much for supporting my channel by watching my videos, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!